back to Push to Be More. I'm your host, Bayne, and today we've got another great conversation about what it takes to make life work. Now, for the regulars to the show, you will have no doubt noticed that I am not Matt Edmondson. Don't worry, Matt hasn't gone anywhere. He's still here and very much part of the essence of Push to Be More podcast. You will be seeing more of me, though, as I'm going to be hosting the show alongside him, so a big hello from me. Joining me today is our very special guest, Bain, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about her unique life experiences, the hurdles that she has had to push through, and the ways that she recharges her spirit, and what steps she's taking to be more. In other words, push to be more. This episode is brought to you by Pod Junction, where we're all about helping businesses share their stories and build real connections through the power of podcasting. Being part of the team at Pod Junction, I've seen firsthand how podcasting can be a game changer for reaching people and making a real impact through meaningful conversations. Now, I know a lot of you listening are leaders and entrepreneurs, and if you're curious about what podcasting can do for your business, or if you're wondering where to even start, head over to podjunction.com. We'd love to help make the process clear and approachable for you. Podcasting offers a unique way to expand your reach and connect with your audience in ways that you may not have considered. And honestly, it's way easier than you might think. So head over to Pod Junction and see what podcasting can do for you. And now, meet Bain. Lauren is the creative director for personal brands and the go-to expert for helping leaders craft personal brands with personality. With a background in advertising for Fortune 500 brands like AT&T and Southwest Airlines, Lauren brings bold creativity and flair to entrepreneurs, authors, and coaches, creating distinctive marketing assets that help her clients stand out. She's a Texas native and a proud UT Austin grad. Lauren's knack for big ideas and authentic expression fuels her work and her life off script as a wife, mother, and caregiver. Lauren, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Oh, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure to have you. Lauren, as you know, I am part of Pod Junction, which is also the sponsor of this show. So the first question I want to ask is, if you had your own podcast and could invite anybody to be your guest, who would you have on and why?
Oh, well, I want to have my own podcast in the new year, so this will be good. I'll manifest it. Honestly, it'll probably be my very first boss at the very first advertising agency I went to, and his name is Roy Spence, and he's phenomenal. And I have so many questions I want to ask him, and I mean, I could talk to him for days, but I also wanted to kind of tell him like where I've gone from starting, because he feels like the father of me and my like where I grew up. And so Roy Spence would be who I would love to have on my podcast.
So tell us a bit more about him. Why, what has he taught you? What is it that about him that you want to, pick his brains about?
Yeah, so I went to school, as you mentioned, the University of Texas at Austin, Hookham, and I came there wanting to do broadcast journalism. I thought that was going to be my major. I liked the idea of knowing about news, reporting the news. I thought being the on-camera girl would be fun. And the irony of that is when you go to major and a communications major, the communications college wants you to also take something outside of your major, but in the communications college. So I was in intro to journalism and also intro to advertising, but I just took it as like a box check, and I just didn't really even know what advertising was. I didn't even think about it. It never really occurred to me who makes the billboards and the commercials and the print ads and the radio spots. So being in those simultaneously was fascinating, because the stories I was needing to write for the news, and the news was really shaping and shifting at that time of life, from like more reporting to kind of this editorial space, and it wasn't really like resonating for me. And intro to advertising was me selling things creatively, like the unique harmony and intersection between creativity and commerce. And it just came naturally to me. I was somebody that growing up would come up with the ideas in the neighborhood to have plays in the cul-de-sac, and I would write the scripts and I would cast it, and then we would have everybody come out, and I would charge the parents to sit in their own chairs, and And so when you get to, I'm 49 years old and I feel like I'm pivoting now, and I wear that age proudly because I definitely also want to stand out for women that are thinking that maybe they can't pivot or start over or do something new in this stage of life. So this time that I've just spent this last year was a lot of reflection and looking back on the 25-year career history, which takes you all the way back to like 0 through 18 until you go to college. And so when I saw the thread between creativity and entrepreneurialism, down to like, what are their concessions going to be? Who's going to make the tickets? But also, are the tickets going to be fun and cute? Like there was always this juxtaposition between creativity and entrepreneurialism. And then creativity also would thread through to like the ice skating competitions I was in. I wanted desperately to be able to like land an axel in my pretty costume and win an award for that. But what I knew I could really stand out in and be distinctive in was in the spotlight category, where you got to do anything you wanted. And so I dressed up as Pee Wee Herman. It was really popular at the time, the Pee Wee Herman show. And I did like the tequila dance on ice. And so I would win for that performance. So again, reflecting on kind of those things at an early age that can kind of inform maybe where you go and where your passions are, those were always there. So when I landed in this class, and the professor, like if there's that one teacher or professor in your life that tells you're doing really well at something, or they're like, this is good, you're good at this. It kind of, you believe it and it doesn't feel like salesy or anything. That's what he said. He's like, this comes really naturally to you. And he's like, you see the way of like selling things creatively and you give it a verbal and visual identity that you should really think about. And, this could be a major for you. And then I just started learning all about the industry and the business. And this professor taught me about the account service side and what traffic does and what like media does, and then the creative side. And so I didn't know quite yet that I was in this creative world, but at the University of Texas, they have what's called Texas Creative. And that's basically a creative sequence of classes that you have to apply to get into.
Okay.
And then that's where they teach you the two roles within the creative department. Well, really there's three, but it's design, art direction, and copywriting. And so the copywriter and the art director are typically the partners at an agency that kind of conceptualize and come up with the ideas for the ad campaigns. And then designers work in that as well. But sometimes the art directors can do both. Sometimes there's even writers like me that think really visually, but you kind of have to pick a lane. And so copywriting was the one for me. I wasn't as skilled on some of the graphic design platforms, but I could definitely creative direct ideas that were visual. And I didn't really realize it, how much I loved the art of branding. And I see branding as an art form. And I see the reason why certain ad campaigns to me would convert with customers was, yes, some of the marketing language and some of the sales funnels, but really it's like, we're interrupting people's lives, and so let's reward them with the work, the creative, to make people want to stop and watch that spot. And so some of that was executionally through a commercial or a radio spot, but it was also the brand, like just people saying, oh, I love that brand, that's so cool, and like this, and like things about it, like the Just Do It for Nike and the Nike swoosh and like things like that, like what we've been able to do with just brand always was something I was passionate about. And then going back again, talking about entrepreneurialism, my first agency I was hired at was where I was interning at UT. And so Roy Spence was the S and GSD and M. And that's where I got my start. And it was the biggest agency in Texas and especially in Austin. And they're known for Southwest Airlines and Don't Mess with Texas, which was an anti-litter campaign. And that became a slogan that the agency was known for. And I got started there, as a sophomore in college. And then I was hired on after. And so the reason Roy was so impactful for me was because he was also trailblazing alongside Rick Warren, who wrote Purpose Driven Life. He was starting to really trailblaze purpose-based branding. And he really is one of, to me, the founders of even that verbiage to give brand a higher meaning than just sales, And there are some companies that are just exist to put oil in a vehicle and get the trucks to their destination, and they're just Pennzoil. There might not be a bigger purpose to them. But for somebody like Roy, and what he taught me and why he's so impactful for me is when Herb Kelleher said, I want to start a discount airline business. And one of the reasons he wanted to do that is because it broke his heart that airline travel was so expensive back in the 70s. And so to get around, and it was a big deal to buy an airline ticket to go visit your loved ones. And he's like, what if there was a better way where we could get people around the country that was more affordable? And like, maybe I could create an airline that had cheaper tickets and a different way we did things and had a personality and a feel. And that personality and feel was Roy. So when Roy teams up with Herb Kelleher to launch an airline that had a personality and had a creative expression to it, but it also had purpose, then his creative mind was like, you're not in the airline cheap ticket airline business, you're in the freedom business. You give people freedom to move about the country, which translates into the tagline, ding, you're now free to move about the country. Mm-hmm. So that all made so much sense, and it was so clear to me. And he's actually written a book, It's Not What You Sell, It's What You Stand For. He and this really awesome friend of mine, Haley Rushing. So the two of them, they wrote this book that was just so impactful for me from such an early age. And so what ended up being kind of a pivot point for me is I was working on these big brands and I loved it. And I think, you might be able to tell already, like, I have a lot of energy and drive and ambition. I want to make things happen. And so you can't really teach in school. And I hadn't, I guess, really noticed it as an intern. The layers within just like corporate business too. And so it's a big agency and it had hundreds of people in it. And so I was wanting to like wear a bunch of hats and I wanted to go present all my work. And I was just the junior out of school. And so I felt somewhat stifled in a corporate agency model. And so I was like, at this point, I'm about 26 years old and I was reading a book called Quarter Life Crisis. That's ridiculous if that's even a thing, but I guess it was. So that's when personal development started for me, right around that age, and I'm reading books like that. I still felt this huge draw towards entrepreneurialism, but I didn't know how it was going to manifest. And then this desire to work on brands that had purpose. So this is all happening, and then 9/11 happened. Mm-hmm. And when 9/11 happened, I didn't have any family or friends that were impacted. I didn't live in New York, but I was consumed with the magnitude of the event. And and maybe it was the age I was at, all of it just kind of coming together. It was the first time I really thought about myself through the lens of being vulnerable. And so the vulnerability of the world at that time made me, and then the way kind of the messaging was changing about purpose, about life, about all of it. It just became real kind of woo-woo for me about like why we were here and what we were doing with our time here. So I went into work and we were all in shock and like, what is happening, and trying to figure out like, are we supposed to do anything? We're in Texas, we're not impacted, but our nation is, our lives are. Like, this is such a bigger, more humanity driven crisis. And so we talked about it for a little bit. And then my creative director said, all right, so those Chili's baby back rib table tents, we're going to do like a $2 off value message. So if you could get me 5 headlines by the end of the day, like they're going from $13.99 to $11.99. And that'd be great. And he walked out. And again, the mindset I was in, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm just selling ribs for a living. Like, it didn't occur to me because of what you're taught in school, like the craft, and it's like an art form. And there's it's art and science together, and being able to come up with a creative solution that's also really clear, that also has a consumer connection to it, that also differentiates the brand. Like, there's so many elements to creating this work. It never occurred to me that the end result is to convert a sale ultimately, but it's attached to a brand. And so I was always more attached to the work. I never thought about like who it's attached to as the business. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm just selling ribs and I don't want to just do that. And I didn't. Now, if the strategy department had come down and been like, no, now more than ever, we need to gather around as family and friends and have meals together, and you can do it for $2 off with some ribs. Like, maybe I would have like spun it differently, but I was like, no, I want to work on brands with purpose that were founded or had a ethos, a brand ethos that stood for more than just a sales transaction, So I asked to be put on Race for the Cure and United Healthcare and just really purpose-based brands. And then at the same time, Entrepreneur magazine had started coming to the agency, and I was just reading and I was like, oh, this is what an entrepreneur is. Oh, this is so cool. My dad, I'm an only child, but my dad had a Snap-on Tools franchise business. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically like you pay for these huge trucks that have all these tools on them, and then you're given a territory to sell tools to mechanics. And he loved it. And he was like a sales guy. I don't even know if he knew how to use half those tools, but it was always a funny joke in our family. But he loved it. And so he was an independent kind of franchisee owner, but I was never taught about that. Like I didn't really understand what he even did, but osmosis, I saw that he did his own thing. He didn't have a corporate job. My mom was like this really well-respected secretary for like very wealthy businessmen in Houston. She worked at the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. But she only wanted to be a mom. Like that's all she ever wanted to be. So when she had the opportunity to work from home, I saw a woman in the 80s working from home. We had like this huge Xerox copy machine in our garage, which was so cool. And so even that was like not really taught to me, and she was doing it kind of out of necessity. But I was also like, okay, here's a woman who was balancing motherhood with working until she didn't have to anymore. So those were just kind of always seeding subliminally, probably from when I set forth to be like, okay, I think the culmination of I've been here, I've checked some creative boxes. There's really no other agencies in Austin that I want to go to right now. I don't know if even advertising agencies where I want to go next. I really want to start a business. And I saw this need for kids after school who didn't really have anything to do from 3 to 6, that I wanted to get them outside and playing and exploring the outdoors. So I took this big departure and this big leap from corporate world to start Austin Outdoor Kids, A-OK. And it was a beautiful brand. It was really cool, but I didn't know anything about running or business really. And I took kids out and we hiked and biked and canoed. And on paper, it's still now, years later, I reflect back on it. I'm like, oh, that really could have been a business where all these vans were picking kids up after school while their parents were working. Because that 3 to 6 window, is like, what are you supposed to do if you have both parents working? After school enrichment became more of an industry, and I think people started picking up on that opportunity, and so more programs were available. But at the time, it was a really good idea. But so the next kind of 25 years after that was me either like starting a business and then going back to an agency, and I would use a lot of these. I used to beat myself up about it. I used to be like, are you just not sticking with something? Are you just kind of always moving around and going a different direction? But I also trust in divine timing. And so I'm just like, I'm at the mercy of like what I'm being presented. And now again, in reflection, it feels like it was totally divinely planned that I had all these touch points, because now it informs me for almost any person I talk to, because I've worked for a corporate, I've gone the agency model, I've been an executive recruiter to do the job to just make some money for a little while when I was a mom. I've worked directly with founders. I've been an in-house chief brand officer. Then I'll have them be a retainer client. I've had my own agency called Offspring. Offspring was after I became a mom. So that was a big record screech in my life. I was on my way and I was doing all this stuff professionally, and then got married. We procreated quickly. And so I was thrown into this world really fast after becoming married that I hadn't thought about. Like, okay, motherhood's here all of a sudden. I didn't plan it. And I was like, okay, now what do I do? And my experience was my mom, who's like, all I wanted to do is be a mom, and that was so much of her identity, but I didn't know if it was going to be mine. I didn't know if that's all I wanted it to be, but I knew that they were going to always be the priority. So my oldest son is now a sophomore in college, and this will all come full circle, because what I did during that time was 50% entrepreneur, 100% mom, is what I would say. Those numbers, I know those percentages don't add up, but that's what it felt like. Like I still had my businesses, and I would still go back to an agency part-time, or I would work full-time here or there, or, so I never really had something solid, because I really always wanted to be there for the boys, So that's also what led me to, let's see, we talked about, so Offspring was an agency I started, and it was me, and then we would put together project teams to work on different brands. But that was my desire, to marry my world of motherhood with brands who target families. And so I did a Mother's Day, Father's Day campaign for Deep Eddy Vodka. I worked on Smarty Pants vitamins. There's this beautiful New Organics, like clothing line for kids. And so, it was family focused brands that I did the work for. So that felt like a nice harmony of identities. And, do you want me to keep, I feel like I'm talking your ear off.
No, keep going.
And so that was all like what I was doing. And then when my son graduated high school and went off to college, it was like, oh, wow. Like there's felt like there was this, not time, but just felt like there was space again. And then I'll back up a little bit. In 2021, my mom was diagnosed with dementia and then told me, like, she handled everything, and she told me that she needed help. She didn't know how to pay bills anymore. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So I had to step in. I'm the only child there. They didn't have a lot of like resources and family in town there. They live about 3 hours away. And then my dad let me know that he had gotten a tumor that he wasn't sure what it was. And then both of my parents basically ended up with kidney cancer too at the same time. Wow. So my mom had dementia, then we discovered this kidney cancer, and my dad had it too. And different kidneys. So they both had to get that removed. I had to move him here to Austin. So 21 to 23 was really stressful. And then when my son left for college, and then my parents became stable after this couple of years of figuring it all out. Mm-hmm. That's when I was like, okay, I have this space. I feel like, what do I want to do next? And so I had retainer clients then, and I was creating great work, but I just felt called to something bigger, but I didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. And so it was the first time in my life, last fall of 2023, that I invested in me and professional development, personal development. I had never been in a mastermind. I didn't even know what like community memberships were. I knew what mentorships were, but I didn't know who I would have ever hired. So I just decided to invest in these things, and it's just been this whole new world outside of the advertising industry for me that's been so transformative. And and then I decided to join this personal branding strategy membership because they help basically people turn their reputation into revenue is their tagline. And while I was in there, I thought I'd be forming my thought leadership and getting my personal brand established, which I was doing, but I was also trying to figure out what my new business offering was. And one of the things they talk about a lot, and I take my clients through as well, is figuring out who. And I was so in this mode of like entrepreneurialism. What is this business I'm going to do? What is this offering I'm going to have? And I didn't really follow that guideline of like, well, who do you want to serve? Like who do you want to make impact with? And so when, it's just kind of a peeling back, you're figuring this all out when you're going through some of these mastermind events or workshops. And this is like a long monthly membership that you're in. I was watching and I was studying the industry of personal brand. And personal brand for the last, decade, as it's become more in the vernacular, is typically known for your reputation. So it's like the brand you've created just naturally through what you share with people and your reputation. There hasn't been this like intentionality to form a brand with yourself. Mm-hmm. It's just like, this is who I am. And then a brand is formed from years of saturation of voice or expertise or knowledge or whatever you're talking about. So that's just what I thought it was. But what I was watching was a lot of these people that are forming their personal brands, or people out there that don't have the platform of Mel Robbins or Gary Vee or Jay Shetty or Steven, we've talked about before, Diary of a CEO, or Lewis Howes. Like these people have built significant audiences. And so they have a reputation. I was working with a lot of people that were just starting out and building their reputation from a service offering. And so for so long, I've been working on services and products in the traditional brand space. And then all of a sudden I started noticing, well, like a personal brand is actually a brand. Like why wouldn't we treat them like a brand? And so it became more of like a thesis and a hypothesis that I wanted to test out. And it didn't even hit me until 6 months ago. And I was like, well, what if I was because I was trying to figure out, who am I the creative director for? Like, what am I doing? And so I would naturally be around these people and kind of giving advice on this and that. And then I was looking at their branding assets and I was like, that website's it's good, it works. But I was like, hey, you're so much more than that. Because I would meet these people and meet their stories. And I was like, oh, I can totally visually and verbally see like what I did back in that intro to advertising class. It's like, I can see the expression of you, uniquely you. And I was like, more than any other industry, personal brand is a personal representation of you. And so if we've let only the reputation and your kind of publicity side of you carry all the weight of the brand, could I make an argument that what shoes are to Nike and jewelry is to Tiffany and donuts is to Duncan, your course or your keynote speech or your podcast business is to you? And so we have product SKUs. We actually have a book or we have a keynote speech just like Nike has Air Max and Dunks, So I was just thinking, is this even like how we should look at it? So I just kind of started getting it out there and networking and talking to different people about it. And For me, it's really hard for me to sell. Like, I don't feel like a salesperson unless I believe in something. And it's usually just me sharing my passion. If you want to buy it, great. But otherwise, I was just like, let's see if this is going to work. And so I started pitching it to some people and they're like, I want that. And so basically it was what I wanted to sell to was a launch. I love a launch and I love the conceptualization and the expression. And so if you came from this brand strategy firm, you've already figured out your positioning, your messaging, your who and all that. Let me creatively express it now. Let me turn that strategy line into like a Snickers, you're not you and you're hungry. And then that transforms into, I don't know what I'm talking about with those Betty White funny commercials. But like, how does that transform into unique, distinctive brand assets? Because something else I was noticing is like the coach's website, the speaking coach to that life coach, to that marriage counselor, to that marriage counselor, to that marriage, like all of them were like kind of blending in. Their fonts and their colors changed a little bit. But as far as them feeling like a brand, I was like, there's so much possibility there. And so that's what I just started doing, and it's just kind of taken off, and it's just so fun for me because what I realized too is what I've always loved is working with dreamers and people that have purpose, and these are all impact makers is what I call it, is people that are wanting to use their unique expertise and help make an impact in the lives of others. And so if I can be a part of that and help that through my gifts of giving them a unique brand identity and a very distinctive custom website to get them started and known, and then they're off to the races. So that's my TED Talk.
No, thanks, Lauren. Thanks for sharing that. It's fascinating listening to your story to see how it all started. Like, it's like when someone speaks into your life and tells you that you're really good at this, you're a natural at this, it almost gives you permission to pursue that. And it's actually a real gift to have someone say that to you, because not everyone gets that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And listening to you talk too, I feel like you have you've faced some hard times as well. Like there's been challenges along the way. So reflecting back, what is a challenge or challenges that you've faced, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think I've always been pretty introspective. It's a blessing and a curse. It's great to be self-aware. It's great to want to grow every day. But if you're also then an overthinker, because of that can be debilitating sometimes, because everything feels like it needs to be thought through, or it's bigger than just being. Working with a therapist is very helpful because they have tips and tricks. And so my therapist will say, you can put a period at the end of things. And I'm like, how? I want to put a period ... And she's like, it just is. My child, let's think of something. My child failed his test, period. She's like, you go into my child failed his test. That must mean it's because I was so busy. I didn't help him with his homework. Oh, why doesn't he do his homework? Is he okay at school? And you start, catastrophizing things and overthinking it. So I think getting to know myself is one of the ways I've coped with these things, and learning my reactionary methods and the desire to not want to feel that way. I think I've also been around a lot of victimization type people in my life, loved ones and friends, and it's a hard thing for me to understand. So it's not something I understand it. It's a hard thing for me to stay in. Yeah. So that feeling of victimization or feeling like a victim of your circumstances is not a place I like to stay in very long. So that's also something that's made me try to have to figure out what tools I can use to get through it. So I think therapy for sure, exercise, talking it out, reading books. I think for me, an honest, a real tangible tool, if you go to a party and then you're having a great time, and then if you're somebody that goes home that night and is like, why did I say that? Did I say that so loud? Did I say that too much? Why did I do that? And you start spinning out over it, and then you want to call that person, but it's 3 a.m, so why would you call them? And then the next day you're like, did I say that thing? I don't even remember that thing. During that spin out time, if you don't have the ability to not spin out, I have gone usually online, or I'll read a book about what is the craziest thing someone said? And celebrities are doing it all the time, and they come back from it. And so if I see real world examples, or if I read about people with having to manage my mom with dementia, and reading about what it's like to live with your parent whose brain is totally deteriorating on them, I love real world examples. So I love being in those kind of support groups of people experiencing the same thing, because A, it makes you not feel as alone, and B, y'all can just kind of hash it out together. So I usually try to quickly get out of that isolation space of beating up on myself, and think about like other people feel this way, so let's go figure out how we can do this together.
Yeah,
and it just takes the pressure off you feeling like the only one experiencing it.
Yeah, for sure. Talk to me a bit more about your mom's dementia and how that affected you.
I'm in it with a bunch of other people. I still feel very new in this space, but when your parents start getting older and they just start forgetting things, and they're like, oh, it's just a senior moment, they just talk like that. But I could tell she was searching for words. So the type of dementia she has is it's called frontal temporal disorder. It's like the one Bruce Willis has. And so it's like aphasia, so it's words. So that deteriorates in the frontal temporal lobe, and so it makes communication harder. And so when you start aging, that happens anyway, because your brain's kind of shrinking anyway, but hers was doing it at a rapid pace. And so in the beginning, I think there was a little bit of like, are you sure this isn't something else? And I couldn't tell. So once she was finally diagnosed, it was more of like, I kind of already knew this was something. I just didn't know what it was. So it helped give a label to it and somewhat of a prognosis and diagnosis. But I've had the craziest experience with it. My mom and I were best friends, and she and I, when I became an adult and I started carving out an identity separate of hers, I don't think that was her favorite thing. So I feel like as an adult, we'd go at it almost like sisters would sometimes. And it wasn't my most favorite thing. And loving, she's got so much love, and she's such a great mother, and she's such a great grandmother. But I think she wasn't able to have the personal development that maybe that's why I got so into this stuff, and I'm really into just behavior management, mental awareness, our triggers, our response to it. So she wasn't able to own that as much. So what the dementia has done is it's eliminated all the memories she was trapped in, which would come up a lot in our little like spats and stuff, and the stuff with my dad too. She's known him since she was 16, so they've been together like 63 years or something crazy. And it's given me like, if this hadn't happened, I wonder how things would have ended. And her friends tell me that I saved her life. They're like, she was really kind of on death's door because she was just deteriorating so fast, and I didn't live there to see it as much. But I think it's given us this ending, or this I don't know what to call it, ending, just transition that is so peaceful, because it's taken away all that chatter that kind of held her back for so long. And she's just authentically her. And it's kind of cool to see. And it's fascinating too, because I'm fascinated by the brain, that because it's taken away some of that cognition, she's just sweet and loving. And I get to just show up with like her soul. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Sounds like the silver lining in all of this.
So it's interesting. It's kind of peaceful and nice and sweet. And I even started an Instagram channel with the two of us called Remember to Dance, because dancing is still something she's always loved to do. So I was like, that's what I'll do with you. And so it's sweet.
That is very cool. That's very cool. It's so special to have that kind of relationship with your parents or your mom.
Yeah, no, it's been great. It's been great. And the silver lining is that is totally what I try to do. Sometimes you need to just be, but I'm usually always trying to figure out some way to see the message or the lesson in it and pull something positive out of it as much as possible.
Yeah. What about like your dad's tumor as well? And they both, you said, had kidney cancer. How did that impact your your relationship with them and with your own family too? Because that would have pulled you away to care for your parents. And how did that affect your family with your kids, your husband?
It was a rough 2 years, for sure. I'm not going to lie. And the irony of me saying that what ended up, like the restorative process of my relationship with my mom, ended up being the opposite with my dad, which was funny because now I saw a different version of him. It was really hard, and he's gotten, to say people can't change, I will never believe that, because I'm watching a 78-year-old man change right before my eyes. Does he still have a lot of this personality stuff? Yes, but he's willing to make the changes he sees that are necessary to survive and get along. And I can just full on tell him, Dad, I have to put up a boundary with you. And he's like, okay, I get it. And so I'm like, we've had to like have this open communication. But it was very hard for him. He was struggling with like a wife that did everything. She took care of everything. She handled everything. He just kind of like their situation was perfect. And so he's now, I mean, this happened a few years ago. So when he was 76, 75 actually, he had to figure out like all this stuff now. And he never had to deal with it before. And so I did take on kind of this wife role too that wasn't the greatest. So we had to work through that a little bit. And I was like, I'm not your wife. I'm still your daughter. And so I had to figure out resources. And there's so many wonderful resources out there to manage that as well so that I could get back to just being his daughter again.
Yeah.
And then we had to work on just, there's a lot of like, you change your identity a little bit and your roles within that family structure. So it's just kind of, it was just learning. It was learning and coping and dealing. But ultimately I knew after like a big run in with each other that I can't be trying to change them and change the people around me. I can only change like my response to it all, you know, because he had to work on his stuff. So I just started doing a lot of deep work. And then that's when I was like, I'm going to figure out things personally and professionally right now. And that's what I've been doing for the last 13 months.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this has been just me learning my own coping tools to not feel the reaction to the things that are happening and like try to see the compassion and the empathy for them and not make it so heavy. So surrender has been my word for this last year. Just even surrendering in the business. Like I was like, is this going to work? Am I going to make any money? Why did I walk away from this? Like that, like surrender.
I hear what you're saying about being introspective and self-aware, how it can be a blessing and a curse. I hear that. And listening to you talk about your dad too, where he's in that place now where he's aware of what's going on around him and he's willing to change and he's willing to adapt. Sounds like you guys are similar in that way.
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's all been very interesting and it's just life. Just life. All the ups and downs. So I've been glad and I feel privileged and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have this space. And my husband, I could not do this without him being so supportive of me taking some of this time to reflect and dig in professionally and personally. So to answer your earlier question about how it impacted my family, my kids saw versions of me I didn't want them to see, but then I also was like, this is kind of part of life. This is what's going to happen. And I'm not proud of this. And I wish I could change this, but I've learned from it, and here's the lesson in it. So they've been able to witness a lot of personal growth. You know, maybe that's why my son's majoring in psychology right now, and he's actually sports psychology. So like my husband and me together. So it did impact, and it's hard. My husband's again very supportive, but he sees that like this caregiving role is big. It's like almost having another child in my life. Like I need to check in on it, and even when it's stable and my dad hasn't texted me for the day or there's nothing happening over there, it's just always kind of there in the back of my head that like is everything okay? Is everything okay? And so that,
and it's not even it's not just the practical stuff. It's also the emotional weight that you carry with it, right? As it being your parents.
Yep. It's a lot of it. But going back to what I was saying earlier, if I share that with other people, go to support groups, read books, and you're like, well, listen to this story and listen to that story. I'm like, oh, I don't have it near as bad. Or
you don't have to go far, do you?
Yeah, and so it's really helpful for me to kind of story swap with people in the same position because then I just, I look at it differently. I'm like, we're all in this together, and it's just kind of part of it.
Yeah. I like what you said about your kids too, like you were trying to protect them. Well, you didn't like what they saw, but at the same time, you're right, it is reality, and actually seeing it and seeing your growth in it and seeing you come out on the other side is probably really good and helpful and healthy for them too.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Lauren, you have touched on this in some way, but how do you recharge your batteries? How do you stay grounded?
You know what I started recently is I've always been a runner, and I would run like 3 miles, and then I want to get more. So like, let's say 3 miles. Well, running 3 miles would take about 30 minutes. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's going to take so long. It's really going to take 45 minutes because I'm going to lace up my shoes and I'm going to go stretch. And it's going to take me forever to find my Spotify playlist. And then what if it's not 30 minutes because I'm not running fast that day? Can you tell I overthink things? So then I would just not end up doing it at all. And then when you start getting older and you're a runner, your hip starts hurting. And then you're like, should I be running anymore? Because I have some friends that have had to have hip replacements already in like their mid-50s. So like, maybe I should walk. And I was like, well, walking's not going to do anything for me. So just this year, I was like, okay, I have sometimes these 20-minute breaks. Like, I'm not doing anything. I stand up and I stretch. I have a meeting coming up like in 30 minutes. It's not enough time to do work. What if I just go walk my little mile loop? And so it just seems so obvious now, but I get sad if I don't get these breaks. And so I just get up, I go walk a mile. It's so easy. I walk fast. I get nature, I get sun. It's not daunting because I'm like, this takes me about, I don't know, 16, 15, 16, 17 minutes, depending. So you can do something in under 20 minutes, like that's no time to go do it. So it didn't feel as daunting as like, I'm going to go on this run and I go do all this stuff. So I've started doing these repetitively, and then I can take calls. Then I'll sometimes check emails or listen to podcasts, and but just these little shortness about them, the short stints, have made it more consumable. And I'll end up walking like 5 miles and like way more than I would normally. And I'm just like, oh, I did 5 loops today, and then I take my dog. So that's like a crazy recharge. That exercise really, I'd never looked at exercise before like that as being like a recharge in that way. I think I've never used to travel because I've always usually worked from home or worked locally in Austin. And so these mastermind groups and these workshops have had me travel more, and that's kind of new for me. But I've found like getting away, I never really allowed myself to leave because I felt always a responsibility to the family. So I wasn't ever really like a girls trip lady. I probably should have been. Maybe I'll do that more in the second half of life. But so now I'm doing this for professional reasons, and I love entrepreneurialism and business and the space I'm in. So going to these workshops has been really fun, and I've loved just digging in and learning and just meeting a bunch of new people. So that recharges me. My husband and I have like sometimes these morning we call them PT, and instead of like physical therapy, it's pillow talk. And so we'll just lay there in the dark and just be like, what do we have going on today? And we'll just like break down deep thoughts together. That's really recharging for me.
Good. I like what you're saying. It's like what you were saying earlier about investing in yourself. And it sounds like you're doing that not just professionally, but in all areas of life. And that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. And honestly, you can do it for free. And Instagram's kind of the only platform I really consume, a little bit of LinkedIn, but I'm sure this exists on TikTok too. But there are so many gurus and experts and people sharing free, like mental tips and just motivational tips. And once you start following the motivational speakers or the memes that you really like, and they just start populating in your feed, I know it's not great to consume content and scroll all the time, and be careful with it, but it's been very impactful in my life. And I'll see a quote and I'm like, that's right. And then I go start reading some of the comments and I'm like, oh, look at that. Okay. And you get like this weird voyeuristic community in a way that just kind of helped you solve something. And you can even go search a hashtag. So if it were to be like daughters of dementia, and then like go see some stuff. There's just there's so many resources out there. I say this to my kids all the time. It's like, you got to figure out what you want. If you want to feel better, and if you want to get out there, there's too many resources out there to ever really make excuses that A, you're alone, or B, you can't figure something out, because it's kind of all out there. So the investment can be as simple as just starting to follow some accounts that move you.
Yeah. And also what you were saying too, about not taking trips before and doing other things. It's almost like you're in like certain seasons and phases of life only allow for so much at a time, don't they? And it sounds like you're in that place at the moment where you have the time and the ability to be able to just take off and invest. Yeah.
And I may have always had that time, but it just wasn't framed the same as it is now. So again, surrendering to like, you can kind of do it at any time. And I'm a middle-aged woman, I guess, kind of recreating herself right now and starting over. And so I hope that gives permission to anybody that might be listening that you can do it too. And there's opportunities to do it. And I'm just really excited to be able to have the opportunity to talk to people like you and share this whole industry of personal branding. I'm meeting a lot of people that I'm meeting are in a similar stage of life, or they're still young, just like 35 to 55 years old, and have an expertise in something they've been doing for a little while, or just starting out with knowing they want to be a coach or they want to do something with themselves And so I'm like, we all kind of are walking, talking businesses if we have an offering or a message or something we want to give back to people. And so we want to transact with people in some way. And so the terminology of personal brand can kind of be applied to any of us now, because we are a person with a brand, and the elements of a brand are reputation and how you show up in the world and messaging. And so for me, and the thing I'm giving to people is the ability to creatively express that, because that's how we shop websites, we shop brand. And so some people can just meet somebody at a party and say, hey, here's my WhatsApp, join it this way. Maybe they don't need the big website and all the branding and things like that. But if you are somebody that wants to create this movement and kind of an enterprise a little bit for yourself, then I would argue, then let's treat it that way, and let's create your very distinctive and unique and personal and authentic, only to you, custom website. I say sometimes that I believe we're not templates. I'm like, you're not a template. And so while templates can get you started, they can get you started looking like everyone else, and that might be fine for some people. But for the people that want to make sure that their brand really represents them, then I've carved out a space of being very distinctive and using the creative philosophy I was trained and applied to brands for the last 25 years to people now and their services. And it's just been very rewarding creatively, but also it goes all the way back to like the purpose-based branding. It's like every one of these people are impact makers. They all want to provide some kind of transformation. And if I get to be a part of that, then that's so satisfying for my soul as well. And so I'm just like, I hope this keeps going, and I hope that I can work with people that align with the philosophy I have, and that's just kind of where it goes from there. So I see it more as like an investment as well in them and their brand, and not necessarily expense. And it's just your calling card, and it's one of the first impressions you can make that complements the way people know you already through your reputation and experience, but it just also shapes the narrative a little bit when you already have a brand identity that's custom to you.
Yeah, definitely. Lauren, as you're looking ahead, where do you see growth personally and even in your business?
Okay, so I do have some lofty business goals as far as like how many people I want to impact in a year, and then just I want more than anything. I've never been in a space where I can have enough or have been able to have like a foundation or have something that I can give back in a way, like corporate social responsibility and those kind of unique partnerships that I would do for other brands so that they could give back to the Ronald McDonald House through some creative execution of theirs. Just, I would love to have that. I would love to find who that partner, like that aligned partner for me is, that's on brand with me, to be able to give back to a cause I care about. So that's kind of where I see some of this, like the success for me has always been the ability to have my control of my time, and having freedom. And so it might have sacrificed some dollars in the bank, but like I deposited it into my memory bank, and that's important to me. And so now I'm kind of looking more at the monetary like part of this business and like how we could grow that. And so I don't see me right now ever being like an agency model. I really like this independent contractor model, and I like this remote model. I mean, some of my designers work in New York and LA and Chicago, and I'm in Texas, and I meet with people like you overseas. And then I'm just like, COVID was horrible, but it also kind of gave us, it validated the ability for us to actually conduct business virtually this way and remotely. And, I only have one client that's in Austin. Everyone else is all over the country. So I don't see the need to have like a brick and mortar type agency. And I think next, as far as growth would be, is just being able to impact more brands and share more people's stories. Like I love that more than anything. Be like, do you know about this guy? Do you know what he's doing? He's doing this and this and this. And she's doing this and this and this. And it's amazing. And it's great. Yeah. So I'll probably do a podcast as a way just to have more impact, to share these stories of these people. And, I believe what I'm doing now is I'm really trying to help experts become icons. That's my brand promise. And so I could see the Expert to Icon Diaries, Secrets of Personal Brand Unicorns being my podcast. And we'll just talk about that. So I see that being some of the growth. And right now it's just kind of validating this idea and just keep on going and working with really great people. I'm developing an ecosystem of really strategic partners, because there's so many elements of once you create the brand, then there's marketing and sales and funnels and emails and all the whole stuff. But those are maybe more strategic partners that align with brand enough to know, like, don't keep this consistent. Mm-hmm. Don't go create a whole new identity for them in social media. So yeah, that's where I see it growing as of now.
That's cool. So your podcast is going to be a part of that?
Yes. Yes, that's the plan. But I also don't want to get distracted. And I see a lot of us in this space, myself included, they're like, we should do a podcast. Or maybe we should do a speech over here. Or maybe we could do this or that. Oh, I want to do a course now. So I need to stick with what I want to be known for, which is helping experts turn into icons through distinctive branding, and be known, get that going and have a lot of those examples and feel like I've created a lot of amazing work for people and made them really happy and them feel like they have value with their brand and then see where it goes from there. Yeah.
There's lots of shiny things out there, aren't there? And staying focused and being grounded is a good way to go.
Yeah, it's hard. And I know I'll be into the graduation of my second son, and then we'll see what happens there. So I know life will impact some of this growth as well.
Yeah, for sure. Lauren, I'm conscious of time, and I want to be respectful of it. So how do people reach you?
My name. Everyone should have their URL or some version of it. No. Lauren Bain, B as in boy, AYNE, LAUREN, laurenbain.com. You can go there. You can kind of see my background. I'm starting to update that website because when I first got started, I didn't have any personal brand portfolio pieces to show. So what's up there is a lot of my traditional work from the past. But I can show you my thinking. You'll get a feel. You'll know from my site. And I think that my brand is also representative of the kind of work I do. But I do have about 4 brands up there right now that you can take a little sneak peek at. And on my Instagram, it's at Hey Lauren Bain. And and then I also do free, what I call dream catcher calls. And it's a 30-minute call with me to kind of catch your dreams, just like a little dream catcher you'd hang in your window. I think that like the Native American legend for that is more it filters out negative stuff that comes in. But I'm going to say it also catches dreams by filtering it out. So that is what I do. So kind of filter out anything that you don't want to do. And we talk about what you do want to do. And that's a great space to start to kind of figure out like where to map out how you want to come to life with your personal brand. So you can book that on my website as well.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, being on your website, it's fun. So I highly recommend that people go check that out. And we will link to your info in the show notes so our listeners can have access to that. And the website for that is pushtobemore.com. So that's where our listeners can go to find that.
That's awesome.
Thank you, Lauren, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap on another great conversation. A massive thanks to Lauren for joining us and sharing part of her inspiring journey. For a transcript or show notes, or do swing by our website, pushtobemore.com. And a big thanks today to our sponsor, PodJunction, for all you changemakers out there contemplating a podcast as your new vehicle of expression and connection. Definitely connect with us at podjunction.com. And don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts, because we've got more compelling conversations coming up and we don't want you to miss any of them. So from Lauren and from me, thanks for joining in. Have an awesome week, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Thank you.